For today's episode of Back to the City, I'm excited to be joined by Kieran Daly of The Stress of Her Regard. We've got the whole three-piece, of course, in the Minnehaha recording company, and they're going to be debuting 3 songs from the record that will be out early next year. At the Minnehaha recording company, here's The Stress of Her Regard performing Calipigian. That was Calipigian by The Stress of Her Regard, and we'll talk about that in depth, of course, soon enough. But the opening track on Sport Marriage, which is the previous EP, that's the one that Ed produced, is that correct, for that, for that record?
Recorded it at the now defunct legendary Sound Gallery.
With Jacob Gruen?
With Jacob,
Engineering, yeah.
Yes, indeed. Did an excellent
legendary job. Jacob Gruen as well.
That's right.
Yeah.
I hope he's watching that and gets to see himself get called legendary. He deserves it. But yeah, he actually did that one, and we just were really pleased with how it turned out, so we wanted to go work with him again. You know, the last EP we had Tony Lash, we had Ed, we had my friend Mike Willison in Portland, we had BJ Burton, Dave Trimfield. Somehow we still managed to have a somewhat cohesive sound, but we decided we wanted to do everything in the same studio with the same guy.
Yeah.
With somebody who knew us really well, had played shows with us, had seen us live.
Yeah.
So far, I think that decision is panning out pretty well.
Of all of the songs, certainly on the first EP, this one is the most narrative-based.
Right.
There's a Josie character, thought she'd show him where it's at. He found that he could see so far that he became afraid.
It's a little bit about like fear of commitment, when all of a sudden there comes a moment when you're in love with somebody where you begin to realize what you might be in for.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's a point at which, you know, a lot of the commitment phobes of the world sort of freak out a little bit, and maybe they cut and run, or maybe they do something to undermine the relationship, or they do something stupid.
Because they feel the stress of her regard, perhaps.
Oh, there you go. I like what you did with that.
The stress of her regard is from a poem.
Yeah. Clark Ashton Smith.
Yeah, it's called Sphinx and Medusa, and it closes, when from the spaces of eternity, silence, a rigorous Medusa, turns on the lost world the stress of her regard. In your interpretation, what's going on, a little bit of poetry analysis, what's going on at the end of that poem, and how did that become the band name?
I got quite apocalyptic imagery from the poem. I liked the phrase, the stress of her regard. I liked just the beauty of it. There's something kind of arresting about it. And then when you actually read the poem, it conjures up this image of just sort of a bleak, uninhabited, apocalyptic world. And I don't know, I find myself thinking more and more about, you hear weird little things in the news, like 75% of the flying insects are gone. Things like the more carbon is in the atmosphere, the less nutritious crops become. I mean, there's a constant flood of bad news at a density now that we're not used to.
Yeah, that we weren't used to when you gave the band a name.
Right, yeah. No, yeah, but it definitely felt like something bad was coming, and it sort of feels like we're in this long, sort of slow-rolling, multi-causal apocalypse of sorts.
It does. It really does. In the poem, the Sphinx and Medusa are gazing across the past. There's a reference to the eve of time when man no longer yearns. So
that sounds pretty ominous.
It does sound very ominous.
I'm not sure I'd want a life without yearning, really.
Yeah, there is a fair amount of yearning on sport marriage. We're going on a journey through sport marriage at the moment.
Right, yeah.
And the song that we can hear at the moment, produced by Tony Lash, who produced the Dandy Warhols, Holes in Holes, and Elliott Smith, is Shy versus Cool, which has, you have a kind of Jarvis Cocker-esque persona, I think, in this song and some of the others. But I feel that there's a bit of a twist. For you, does the Jarvis Cocker analogy fit? And what's the similarity, what's the difference? One of mine too.
The thing that I always quite like about him is he's writing pop music, but he's not writing pop music that's targeted at some imaginary teenager. And there's obviously some imaginary teenagers in this song, but the narrator's looking back, and
the narrator was one of those.
Yeah, I mean, looking back to when he was, and just that impossible, all-consuming intensity of like that first teenage love.
And I was shy, and you were cool. You were the only girl that I could love in school. You got drunk, so I got high. I couldn't remember my own name when you walked by. When you walked by.
There's an affinity with like the pulp song Babies.
Oh, yeah.
I Want to Take You Home.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I love that.
You Might Be My Girlfriend.
Right.
Yeah. But I feel that there are some details in this song that do something a little different, I think, than, say, what Jarvis Cocker would do. The lyric, she got drunk, so I got high, is interesting. There's this cause and effect thing going on.
Yeah, where you feel yourself sort of get pulled into somebody's orbit because you're so fascinated with them that you just, you get swept up in whatever it is that they're doing, and you sort of lose a sense of yourself. I think it's funny because when you're in that state, you're probably your least attractive. So,
exactly, yeah.
And if anyone is going to be attracted to you, it's because of who you are and what you're about.
He doesn't know his name when she goes by. It's the next lyric.
Yeah, sort of, you're paralyzed in that person's presence, and you become just sort of like this mute, helpless, adoring.
Why is it called Shy versus Cool?
I'm not sure why I did that, to be honest. I mean, I should give that some thought. I've thought of myself a lot in high school in that song, obviously, and I was just, man, like the farthest thing from a cool kid you could possibly be. I was just this utterly bewildered, recent transatlantic transplant.
What a terrible thing to be.
I was dancing when I was 8.
So in the beginning of that song, there's first of all the reference to the stupid things I used to say to get you to look my way.
Right.
I'm thinking of like beckoning, calling for
Right, yeah.
something that then becomes a stressful regard
Yeah, that is true.
before one has experienced it.
You know, she effortlessly commands that regard, right?
To get she's trying to get the other boys to stare. That works so well for her.
Right.
So we have these two characters, and they're like foils to one another. There's a contrast, but there's the causal relationship, I think, is the thing that is in this song that I don't hear so much in Babies,
Right.
where the shy character is transforming, is metamorphosizing in a way which is only making things worse, like within this song.
Yeah.
Well-
Making things worse, I think, is a pretty succinct summing up of my attempts at romance at that time.
So fast forward, the song that we opened the episode with is also dealing with like a romantic situation, looking back
Right.
at one. What new features does this song have that go beyond the previous E EP?
The narrator's older. At the same time as it's sort of like a diss song in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
It's also the narrator sort of scolding himself for being stupid enough to be in this relationship in the first place. And I hate to be boring and autobiographical, but there is definitely an element of that recently in my life when the song got written.
So we've got two characters again.
Right, yeah.
What's happening with these two characters?
I think one of them is somehow trying to like exercise those demons by just sort of cataloging all of the things that were not cool, that were not great. Even though this person is like ridiculously sexy and really beautiful, and like there was a reason they were together, and obviously there was some sort of a irresistible attraction that gets you to hang out with somebody where you're like, I don't like any of your friends. I don't like any of the people that I'm around right now. I don't like any of the situations that I'm in. I don't like any of the places that I'm in. But you're sort of again like the character in
Shy versus Cool.
Shy versus Cool. You're sort of dragged against your better judgment, or you let yourself be dragged. You're a party to it, whether you want to admit it or not.
Yeah.
You
So
know.
it's interesting, the transformation from shy versus cool. You're realizing things that are not cool.
I think the
about the
contrasting
situation.
these two songs just proves that I haven't learned anything.
I love the title.
Oh, yeah.
And it comes from the Greek, Kalipagas.
Yeah.
Kali meaning beautiful,
Right.
and pug meaning buttocks. And it's like a diss track
Right.
to some extent. So on the one hand, the chorus is addressing an individual,
Right.
casting them in that role
Right.
as kind of just that. But then on the other hand, Jew, that's the name of one of the camera people on the shot, was talking about his inability not to shake his ass to said song. So there's like two different levels to it. I feel
that's
like there's a
fantastic.
celebration of beautiful ass shaking too.
Yeah, hey, that's the thing to be celebrated, man.
Dance myself into
Let's focus just a little bit more on the song that you opened with.
Uh-huh.
It begins with that descending guitar.
Yeah.
Maybe coincidentally, for me, it seems to kind of preempt the "Babe, you could have dropped me from 100 miles up. I was always going to land on my feet." I
Right.
feel like, that descending guitar part, and then we kind of land, and here we are, like,
Right.
in the song. Does that fit?
Had not occurred to me. I suppose it does. Yeah,
Yeah, there you are.
I'm glad there's that symmetry.
Cats land on their feet. Instead of shy versus cool, we have Prince of the Cats.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
how the character self-defines now.
Right.
The lyric is, "You thought you had a Romeo, but you had a Tybalt, Prince of the Cats."
Right.
That's me. Which isn't, of course, the most flattering
Yeah.
role in which to cast
Yeah,
himself.
Tybalt's a monster, and that was his nickname in
Yeah.
the play, right?
In Romeo and
the
Juliet,
Cats,
yeah.
because he was such a badass fencer. So
He
yeah.
keeps time, distance, and proportion, according to Benvolio. Why, what is Tybalt? Benvolio asks. More than Prince of Cats, I can tell you, the Captain of Compliments as well. So there we have like the character in the Shakespeare play being ridiculed as self-flattering.
Right. Yeah.
There's a massive difference, I think, between the two songs. You're referring to the stupid things, and
Right,
the
yeah.
stupidity of trying to impress the cool character, who is, you already referred to as like a fictional teenage character anyway.
Dropping from 100 miles up, but I was always gonna land on my feet. Thought you had a Romeo, but you had a Tybalt. Prince of the Cats, that's me.
That's the other difference, I think, in terms of like a pop song, at the end, when the cool, loved, person moves away, it's because their mother has died.
Right.
So there's a tragic component, or like a real human drama beyond like the teenage version of the story.
World comes in and intrudes on this, this all-consuming thing that you think mattered more than anything else, and then something like that happens.
Yeah. Is that a recurring feature? There are songs that are within this teenage world, say, and then you decide, okay, I'll have some of those generic features, but then there will be things that really don't fit with that, and that change things.
Well, I wouldn't want to stay in it. Like what some of the first rock and roll music ever was exclusively, in that teenage world, and there'd be something a bit weird about being grown and just, trying to write about that exclusively, like just sealed within it. You want to have that adult perspective.
Yeah.
My sister was like, "Why are you writing about this teenager?" I was like, "Well, it's an adult looking back."
Yeah. I want to hold your hand and all of, those kinds of motifs. It's such a small part of the human drama and the gamut of experience that we all have. Right. Each of those 5 songs on Sport Marriage, perhaps because of the different producers, perhaps for other reasons, seems to be doing something quite different. So that's the one which is most, has the affinity with pulp song. A song like Class Warfare, is clearly a lot more political.
I have this weird thing that I think probably a lot of songwriters experience, right? Where you write something and then you suddenly look at it again a few years later, and you feel like it was addressed to a future self.
Yeah.
To the self that you are in this moment now.
Yeah.
And that somehow like it was eerily prophetic.
Give us one reason not to do it. Give us a reason to stand down.
Is that happening with Class Warfare?
Especially given that we didn't have a fascist in charge of the world's most powerful country at the time that I wrote it, and it's about creeping authoritarianism. So the tanks were rolling to our windows, but we didn't hear them.
Because we were protesting in bed.
Protesting in bed, being consumed with what turned out to be fairly trivial concerns in the face of something which could be actually popular. A lot of times I'm like, if there's a riff happening and we're playing and it seems to be working well, just nonsense words will come out, or nonsense noises or syllables, and eventually they start forming phrases. And it's sort of like, getting a bunch of like refrigerator poetry or something, and sorting it out sort of gradually, and finding that rhymed with that. All right, cool. That's kind of an interesting phrase. I wonder what that leads to. And then that's sort of one of those songs that happened like that.
And and all of a sudden you have Give Us a Reason Not to Do It. And instead of Shy versus Cool, you have Class versus Class.
Well, it's certainly a lot of, it definitely feels like it's very top down, class warfare right now. Everyone uses that phrase as sort of, alluding to like the rabble rising up and overthrowing the current order. I think we're
which is
in
more
a new Gilded Age right now.
Yeah, absolutely. You are the voice of a class. You're like a chorus in that song. Give us a reason not to do it. How did that come to be?
I don't know. I just sort of happened,
Yeah. Are there other songs?
There are fewer and fewer reasons not to do it now. Right?
Yes.
If the it is taking rather direct action against an established order.
I can't recall a word he said.
Is it domino? What do you shout?
Yeah.
Domino?
Yeah.
Why domino?
Just sort of the
domino
the
effect?
old image of the domino effect, and the dominoes toppling. And,
Yeah.
Yeah, it sort of felt like they were beginning to topple, and then they're off to the races. By the people, for the people. Brexit hadn't happened yet.
Yeah.
The single stupidest, most spiteful thing
Yeah,
any
I
democracy
agree.
had done until America asked England to hold its beer. What was the old Tammany Hall quote, like, you can always pay one half of the poor to shoot the other half.
Are there songs on the new record that kind of pick up where this song, Class Warfare, leaves off?
Yeah, definitely. There's a song that we actually decided not to do for the session, but it's called Wall and Broad. It's a reference to the first car bomb, actually, which was set off on the corners of Wall and Broad Street. It was a nag and a cart and some scrap iron and some dynamite. And it was a guy called Mario Buda, who was an Italian anarchist. And he was trying to kill J.P. Morgan, who was at his entourage in Scotland at the time. And managed to deafen his son in one ear and nearly kill JFK's dad, who was around the corner when it went off. You know, could have totally changed American history there.
Yeah.
But did not.
How did you find yourself zooming in on that particular...
I had actually read a book called The Brief History of the Car Bomb, Buddha's Wagon, and it sort of draws a narrative sort of arc between that moment and then the World Trade Center. It's a fascinating history, and it's mostly not what you would think, which would be like lone wolf terrorists for the most part. It's mostly, you know, state-sponsored. But then, of course, the terrorists are like, this is cheap and easy. We're going to start doing this.
Okay, and so that's the thesis of the book you were reading. Is the song also kind of communicating that?
It's not specifically about car bombing or anything like that, although it just sort of makes an allusion to that event in its title, and there's a bridge in which that character begins talking. But it's also a series of images about the corrosion of society and societal collapse. I suppose there's a through line between we missed the tanks rolling up on us because we were protesting at bed, and then there's a line about the bored children of billionaires camping in the park, just sort of, you know, Occupy Wall Street, which is a lot of sound and fury, which didn't really get anything done. Trustafarians in the park, and then the next line is about mothers crying for kids who were shot in the park. I mean, it's hard not to now sort of engage with everything that's happening. I used to sort of distrust any kind of overtly political message in popular music, particularly as, you know, preachy or uncool, or I sort of distrusted its motives, right?
Yeah, hence the protesting in bed lyric, for example. Yeah.
And I still have a healthy skepticism towards it. But I think if you're not engaging with what's happening in the world in some way, then you're just an entertainer. You're just distracting people. You're really sort of part of the problem.
So that song isn't on the record, but other songs that...
Wall and Broad wasn't on the... We didn't record it at the studio with you, but like, it's going to be on the record.
Oh, it is on the record. Okay, great.
In fact, I think it might be the first thing we put out.
Secrecy is a recurring theme in just these three songs, which is the only three that I've heard. Babe, I'll Tell You a Secret is a lyric in the song that we open with, and Sugar High is going to be up next. If love was a secret, you couldn't be messing around.
Right.
Yeah? These two songs bear more of a relation to, say, Shy versus Cool than Class Warfare, whereas other songs on the record will also...
But there's a politics and love thing going on, I guess.
Yeah.
Just, you know, maybe that's what we'll call it, it's the politics of love. But in Sugar High, it's sort of a reference to people. Some people will, you know, sometimes compartmentalize their lives. They'll sort of firewall off maybe their romantic life from other aspects of their life as a sort of way of, you know, protecting yourself from any consequences that might come later. You can't really, I think, have a real love with somebody unless you're in some way, unless you're really in each other's lives.
Yeah.
You know, not creating sort of an island where everything is ideal and there are no problems and they've not met your dysfunctional family or your dysfunctional friends.
Right, yeah. So like the character whose friends are the zombies and wasters, rich kids and racists, and you know, again in the early song, to not have a problem with those with whom one socializes, having those views, and to compartmentalize.
Right.
You know, here's my nice time with my friends, and not to kind of think, well, hang on, this relates to all these dominoes falling everywhere else. Like, how does this relate to that?
This is an interesting interview because I think I'm finding myself thinking in new ways about these songs and how they relate to each other, and seeing things that I actually hadn't really thought about before. You know, there's that old cliche phrase, the personal is political, right? And especially as we're seeing, you know, a big cultural sea change in attitude towards things like sexual assault and tolerance of harassment and things like that. You sort of find yourself reflecting, hopefully, most of us do, on your own behavior, on the things you might have just sort of let slide and been like, oh, that's a little off, but it's probably no big deal. There's a great line in one of Jason Isbell's songs where he talks about being a white guy and wishing he hadn't just been one of the guys laughing at another white guy's joke, which of course it's implied as, you know, or if not laughing at it, just letting it slide, you know, somebody tells a racist joke or something like that.
Yeah.
So yeah, the person was, but if you're tolerating that in your life, that, and then you suddenly look at all of this stuff happening in the world politically that you're dismayed by, there's, you know, it's all of a piece, you know, it's all connected.
Just on the basis of these 3 songs, whereas before in Shy Versus Cool, like the broader reality infiltrating the song at the end came in the form of the death of one of the characters' mothers. Here it seems like the broader reality is more like the political context, which would make sense. Each of us, to some extent, we adapt who we are to kind of suit the expectations of someone that we want to impress. In Sugar High, there's I think quite, you know, a few isolated lyrics again. The parts of me that joined with you are all abandoned now. One time that's followed by neurons fire lonely in the dark, and then the next time it's a lighthouse to an empty sea somehow. Could you reflect on those 2 metaphors and what you're suggesting about the loss of self through the failure to, you know, be one's authentic self?
Yeah, or a love failing. There's this sort of phantom pain that happens emotionally, right? When you break up with somebody or they break up with you, that stimulus is always there and you're always sort of reaching for it. Some part of you is reaching out and there's nothing there anymore. It's sort of like a death in that way. Yeah. You know, where there's this part where your mind just sort of runs into a brick wall thinking about that person that you lost. That's there because they're not here anymore. They can't respond. The only part of them that's really there is you know, your memories and your sense of them.
Even the neurons firing, which are like parts of you that have been lost, they are lonely.
Right.
They become lonely.
Yeah. It's just like you know, one of those ill-advised radio transmissions that we send out into the stars in the hope that something will come back.
So it's a song about lost connection, but at the same time, as a song, it's something that, you know, I'm connecting with at the moment, I'm relating to.
Yeah,
so
the irony of writing about like disconnection is someone can like be like, yeah, I relate to that.
It turns out there'll be some people out at sea that will get these messages from this lighthouse.
I hope so.
Yeah, so let's put it to the test. This is Sugar High by The Stress of Her Regard at the Minnehaha Recording Company. That was Sugar High by The Stress of Her Regard, live at the Minnehaha Recording Company. So it kind of sounds like, or feels like, the sensation of a sugar high. Could you talk a bit about the use of that image?
It was an accident, actually. We were in the studio and we didn't have any vocal noises even in that part of
Yeah.
the, you know.
For the chorus?
Yeah, and Ed was like, come on. Come on. And I think I thought I was making some bold artistic choice, but I'm not going to have a chorus, man. The song's cool enough without it. I convinced myself of that, and Ed was like, nah, you got to come up with something. So that was just sort of the first thing that came to me. And, and you know, it worked as a metaphor for one of those sort of infatuations that is sort of all-consuming, and then when it's gone, you realize it was just, you know, it didn't nourish you, it didn't give you anything back.
We'll be closing today's episode with, I think, my favorite of the new songs, which is called Meds.
Oh, okay.
In the chorus, there's a list of people that one can tell. Tell one's doctor is one of them. Doctors have come up in the Sport Marriage EP as well.
Yeah.
So in Love versus Hate, poets know that the game is rigged initially, and then what about the doctors?
Doctors say first do no harm, and then in
the doctors say first do no harm,
like the Hippocratic Oath, right? And then in the last line, it's the doctors know that the game is rigged, and the poets sound the alarm.
What's going on with each of those statements? Each seems quite pregnant.
The poets knowing the game is rigged is, I suppose, like knowing that love is a rigged game in some ways, and then, you know, the doctors, the reference to the doctors in the first is just sort of an intimation of mortality, and then in the third verse, the doctors knowing that the game is rigged. I mean, very few people are more aware of mortality than doctors, maybe undertakers, but and you know, the poet's job or the artist's job, I suppose, is you know, the two great subjects are, right, love and death. The poet's job is to give you enough of a handhold of meaning to make it through the final curtain. You know?
Yeah, and to legislate, to be the unacknowledged legislators that are sending out the signals from their lighthouses. That's what the doctors are doing in Love versus Hate.
Right.
What might one be telling to the doctor or to one's father or to one's other father in this song?
It's sort of, you know, a song, I suppose, about a certain kind of over-medicated, privileged existence that is stifling in its way. The character in the song is trying to get out of that existence.
Yeah.
You know, the tell your father, tell your other father, you know, reference to you know, successive successive divorces, and they're not coming out of the room until their meds run out. It's just an effort to define yourself in any way that you can that would at least be different from what you're seeing around you. And there's an element of desperation to that, you know, especially when you're much younger.
A desperate desire to be something other.
Anything but what you see your parents doing.
Again, there's kind of younger characters then, but then there's statements about oneself as well, and specifically my little death.
Right.
Is that like the idea of the tiny death?
Right.
The so orgasm.
Right. Exactly. Well, the little death is
a red
sort of
butterfly.
the narrator referring to his love. You know, red butterflies. Just, you know, it was just, hey, it was just an image that just popped into my head. So
yeah.
But it's
interesting.
Like a nice way to refer to someone. You know?
It's something out of the ordinary too. It's interesting. There is this desire, like the young person has this desire to be something other than what they have been set up to be by their parents and by the other authority figures.
And you know, it's easy to pardon me never when you're living a privileged life. You know, I think there's a sort of blithe assumption that you can just sort of, you know, carry forward momentum and never turn around and look back and never apologize or acknowledge the impact you're having on the people around you. And in that way, you know, the character in the song is repeating the sins of their parents.
Yeah, like the character in The Ballad of Josie and Davy, who is independently driving in your daddy's car.
Right.
It's the same type of figure. And so they desire this scent, this sugar high, this rush of excitement, this momentum, and this maybe false sense of being free.
Right.
But I feel like in the verses, there is this other thing, even just like the whimsical, like spur of the moment decision to describe the love as a red butterfly.
Right.
Like that seems there does seem to be more freedom
Right.
there in that, even just talking about like how the lyrics, the genesis of the lyrics, it kind of came from nowhere.
Right.
Yeah. I feel like if these three songs are anything to go by, there was always like a dancey component to The Stress of Her Regard, but I feel like that might be becoming a bit more prominent.
Well, yeah, I'm not sure how conscious that is. It's just sort of how our songs have evolved. But I'm glad of it. You know.
Yeah.
It's if you're gonna sing songs about people's shallow materialistic existences, at least it's a bit of a downer if you can't at least shake your ass to it.
Yeah.
Should at least be able to do that.
Yeah, shake us out of our ailments. In Sport Marriage, in the final song, Sport Marriage, which we can hear at the moment from the Sport Marriage EP, there's the lyric there about vows. I don't care about your vows. There's a lyric in Sport Marriage.
When we wrote that, we were in this practice space that is in this really bleak industrial part of North Minneapolis, and it really feels like a sort of building where a serial killer would take his victims. I don't know, for some reason I was thinking about seedy affairs and like in motel rooms and things like that. Several people close to me were going through like the dissolution of their marriage in pretty grim circumstances. So that was the stuff that was doing this sort of cynical view of love as doomed, and you just and that view also lets you out of the responsibility of respecting other people's vows or their decisions or their families.
That's interesting. So there's the perspective of love as a rigged game,
right,
and as a sport,
right,
and whereas in the other song the poets know that to be the case,
right.
Here, that judgment is...
The character in this song is a lot more, submerged in that. Not really. They think of themselves as worldly and that they really get what's going on, but they don't really have that perspective.
Yeah.
They don't have the wisdom that they think they do.
And it's now that character that's being put under the lens,
right,
and being found to be... There's an inauthenticity there.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
The characters, I think, trying to let themselves off the hook for some questionable behavior by pointing out the inauthenticity of the person that they're indulging in it with.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really. It just makes them just as inauthentic and just as complicit.
I bring up the lyric about vows. Where's your morals and your vows?
Right.
Is the refrain in this song that we're about to close the episode in Meds. Are we going back to the same territory as at the end of the previous EP?
The character in that song is sort of...
In Meds.
Yeah, in Meds is sort of addressing society, people who are supposedly the grown-ups and are the arbiters of morality, and they're asking them, in the face of what's going on, where is that? Where is that morality?
So we've gone from having the shy teenager as a foil to the cool teenager,
right,
to now in this song that we're about to close with, the song is passing judgment both on the young person who's caught in the act of doing that, and an older generation, or these authority figures.
I wanted to have, if not an unreliable narrator, somebody who is recognizably flawed as well.
Right, questioning everything, including themselves.
Right.
Again, the Prince of Cats.
The character that's being sort of addressed critically in that song is, accused of wanting a Romeo, wanting this idealized, impossible to live up to romantic standard, and being told that that's not what you have on your hands here. You have something quite different, and they are going to land on their feet when this ends.
Speaking of when this ends,
Is it that time?
it is about to end, but you have a show coming up.
Yeah, we do.
When and where is your show?
That is going to be at the Nomad on January the 6th. We're going to be playing with Floods. Should be a fun time.
Cool. Okay. And in the meantime, presumably you'll be playing these 3 songs.
We will. We'll be playing everything off the current record, and then I think almost all of the EP as well. We've got a cover of Moonshiner that we've been trotting out, which is sort of a very sort of spooky version of that old Appalachian song that most famously Bob Dylan did.
Yeah.
But predates him, actually.
Great. That to look forward to.
At least that's what we're going to tell the lawyers.
Tell the lawyers. That's again a lyric from the song Meds that we're about to experience. So we can catch Stress of Beauregard at the Nomad on January 6th. And in the meantime, here they are with the 3rd and final song that they're debuting from the new record in today's episode. This is Meds at the Minnehaha Recording Company. Thank you very much, Kieran, for coming in. Very welcome indeed. And I look forward to January 6th. Here's Meds.
That was a really fun, interesting conversation.
Cool.
Because, like I said, I hadn't actually thought about all of the threads that were running through all of these things.
Yeah.
Lyrically as much, and it's nice to be able to sort of take a deep dive into that stuff. And,
yeah, definitely.
you know,
yeah,
definitely. It's one of those conversations where I'm coming out the other side of it with a bit of a different perspective on what I'm doing. So thank you.
Oh, brilliant. Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, thanks, Kieran.